LBC, life before COVID. Who remembers that? The coronavirus has changed the world, hasn't it? I don't think the average man could have foreseen what was going to happen, how the world is going to change, what it's going to look like. I only started YouTube and really doing anything in this way to show people what it's like being on the front line, what it's like being a junior doctor, being in the NHS, what I think is the greatest healthcare system in the world. That's what made me put together my videos. That's why I wrote Take a Deep Breath. I wanted to journal every day, and it really helped me mentally, but I wanted to share that and let people know what we went through on the front line and what we're going through. I wanted to look across the spectrum, from primary care, which is GPs and A&Es, to the hospital, to even the future. My thing is to make people see from different angles what it's like being on the front line. That's why I put together this video. So what's the future going to make of this? I had a chat with a consultant paediatrician to see what that's going to be like. They've lived through the coronavirus pandemic. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event for their generation. How will they turn out? What does the future hold for our young ones after being scarred by COVID?
I'm going to have to cast my mind back because I think things have just evolved day to day, as I'm sure is the case with everybody. But right at the beginning, it was the great unknown, and we prepared like everybody else, assuming that the kids were going to get hit as bad as adults did. And so it was lovely to see from an NHS point of view and actually what it means to be a doctor from my perspective, because it was a total call to arms where everything was dropped and we prepared for the worst case scenario. And it was lovely. Myself, very young, dynamic consultants, as well as let's call them the veteran experienced consultants, were all put onto a single COVID pandemic rota where we prepared and actually carried out for a few months 3 shifts on, 3 shifts off. This included night shifts. So for some of us who are 55 plus, having not done a night shift for 15, 20 years, it's quite onerous, but nobody shied away from it. Nobody made excuses. But then came the relief of actually this doesn't really affect children as it does in adults in the acute phase. So some of our consultants went to the adult ITU and adult COVID wards to help out with whatever they could.
I also wanted to hear the stories of other doctors too, how it's affected them personally.
So it was great to see. The teamwork was fantastic. The morale was very up and down. And the worst part of it was being very isolated. I think that's the thing that hit us the most, because we are a very cohesive unit, as you remember from your time with us. And I think that's what I struggled with the most from a mental health point of view, just not doing what I normally do with the people I do it with.
I also wanted to hear what it's like being a GP right now. You don't want to hear it from me though, let's hear it from someone else. So I turned to my old trainer to see what she's had to go through. She's the one that helped me become a GP.
Things changed very dramatically and very quickly. We all knew that we were all meeting an unprecedented challenge in the NHS, and we knew that we would have to dig quite deep, I guess, in getting ready to manage what was coming. And there was fear, I guess, amongst all the team at work and the doctors, and I suppose myself included, in terms of making sure that we were ready. And so we were faced with it very early on as a challenge. And at that point, there were very few guidelines on how to manage COVID. And so we had to sort of make our own guidelines. And we had no protection at that point. We had no PPE, but we already had a case in the building. We had nothing to protect ourselves with at that point. So there was a lot of fear amongst our staff about how they were going to cope and whether they were going to be at risk. And of course, I felt very strongly that they needed protection, because they are amazing people, and they sign up to care for people, but they don't sign up for risk to themselves or risk to their family.
Now that's all well and good. These are established doctors dealing with pressures, right? What is it like being a junior doctor now, or going to be a junior doctor soon, after COVID?
Yes, I definitely think COVID has made a lot of support more accessible, because it had to be done online, and it being online meant people who are on placement, in some students that are on placement far away, and they already feel disconnected from what's happening in Southampton because they're nowhere near it.
I made a journal every day throughout the first wave. I still do. It really helped me get through it. That's how Take a Deep Breath came about. It went on to be a top seller in 2 Amazon categories. Now, I didn't really have much ambition when it came out, but I was really surprised when I got to the BBC. We were talking about COVID, the vaccination programme, so I wanted to share that interview here.
Had a real impact on many health workers' mental health. Dr. Tala Sami works as a GP and an A&E registrar. During the last year, he's kept a journal documenting the impact dealing with patients with such severe ill health has had, also so many deaths, and the impact it's had on him and others. Well, his thoughts have now been released as a book, and it shines a light on just how our vital health workers have been affected by these unprecedented times. Dr. Sami has been speaking with Joe Talbot.
So I was working as a junior doctor, just finishing up my final exams to become a GP, hopefully promote myself as a A&E doctor as well. We saw COVID from a distance in England because it came to Europe first, and we were all very anxious about it. It does finally get here in March, and we all remember the first lockdown. Very bizarre times. My trainer, Charlotte, she was such a support for me. She said, in decades of experience, she's never seen anything like this. In that time, we were all very anxious, particularly as doctors, because we were dealing with something we didn't know how to treat. Now, in the diaries, Take a Deep Breath, that I released, it comes across that, as doctors, we're people too. I mean, I failed my last exam that I was meant to pass. I was worried about a loved one who was shielding. So we had all of these own personal concerns as well as trying to do our best at our day job. And that was stressful at times too. There's one story in there that's really poignant. Sometimes words don't do justice, right? I appreciate not everyone's going to buy it, but I really want you to hear this story. So Sonia, thank you so much for joining me today. And the thing that I think connects us is the memory of Rikul Patel. So in our sort of experiences, we both came across Rick in different circumstances, and he was truly a wonderful person. And I guess I wish I got to know him a lot more than I did. In Take a Deep Breath, I kind of recount how I found out about that he passed, which was a really sad time for me. And I know in our personal private conversations, you kind of recollected your thoughts and the grief and how difficult that was, something I can't begin to imagine for someone so young with so much potential. So I just thought, it would be maybe poignant within living a COVID world where so many people have lost relatives.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is something that you will never be able to compare to anything else in life, and especially when it's so unexpected. And my husband didn't pass away from COVID, however it was unexpected, and I feel that certainly the people who have lost relatives and friends throughout this unprecedented period is certainly unexpected, and I feel, grief in itself is difficult, but when you're not anticipating it, it makes it that much more harder. And as time also goes on and the process itself sinks in, grief also magnifies itself insofar as that's when things start to hit you and you do this sort of roller coaster motion where you're dipping in and out of moments where you allow it to hit you, and it feels like you've been knocked down by a truck, and equally it'll come in sort of slow waves where it feels like it's almost kind of touching your feet and then dissipating. So it is, I think it affects people in very different ways, and it's about the personal perspective of trying to deal with it in whatever way makes you feel comfortable. There's no particular prescription as such as to how people can really go about dealing with grief, and I feel like it's something that you, with trial and error, work out what works for you. Some people feel I guess surrounding themselves with loved ones surrounding themselves with the memories of that person can actually allow them to, I guess, to live in, well, live in the memories of that person that they've now lost. But equally, there are moments where I just don't want to see anything to do with the person who I've lost. It feels far too painful to look at what could have been, what should have been. And, you know, I think that's a part of grief that people who are not going through that experience tend to forget. You're not only grieving the person you've lost, but you're also grieving the life that you could have had with that person, especially if it is a spouse, or if it's a child that you've lost, or, you know, that sort of thing. It's very difficult to put those could be, would be, should be aspirations aside, and that's another part of grief that you feel.